Christian, we are to speak the truth in love. Welcome to the Ryan Holmes podcast, where our goal is to encourage Christian thinking and Christian living. My name is Ryan Holmes, and I am your host. This is episode 2, and I'm incredibly excited about the topic that I'll be bringing to you today. The topic is truth. We're going to be talking about truth today. Undoubtedly an episode that I am incredibly excited about. Is truth knowable? Can it be found? Is there such thing as truth? What are we to make of this speak your truth movement in our culture today? I'm going to be answering all these questions and more in the episode today. So I hope you are ready to jump in. You would think that a question such as, does truth exist, would be rather simple to answer and would have a pretty short response. Yes would seem to be a reasonable response to this question, that yes, truth does exist. It's something that really does seem to be self-evident, but leave it to today's society to take something simple and confuse the mess out of it. Nowadays, a simple answer such as yes, truth does exist isn't so popular. Some would even go as far to say that it might be intolerant, because what does that imply? Saying truth exists implies that somebody could be ignorant of that truth and therefore could be wrong. And no, we would never, ever want to suggest that anybody at any time could ever be wrong. So how do we as Christians navigate today's speak your truth culture? Does speaking your own truth actually make any sense? Well, let's take a look today. If you're wondering what I mean by truth, I simply mean that which corresponds to reality. That which corresponds to reality. For example, you can believe with every fiber of your being that 2 + 2 = 5, but you will always be met with the hard reality that 2 + 2 = 4, and that it'll always equal 4. So when I'm speaking of truth, I simply mean that which corresponds to reality. So how do we come to knowledge of the truth? Well, I'd like to look at a few ways in which we come to discover truth. First of all, as we get started today, I want to touch on the 3 fundamental laws of logic. The 3 fundamental laws of logic. These laws of logic are what we use every single day of our lives. They're not things that necessarily have to be taught or learned. These are things that are fundamental to our reality and fundamental to our understanding of reality. You and I inherently know what they are, whether we realize it or not, and they are building blocks in the pursuit of truth. So, number 1 is the law of identity. The law of identity. The law of identity states this. It says, if a statement has been determined to be true, then the statement is true. For example, if I make a statement that it is snowing and it's the truth, then that statement must be true. If we look at the law of identity in very general terms, it says that each thing that exists is made up of its own particular characteristics that are a part of what it is. The law of identity essentially means that everything is itself and it cannot be something else. Snow cannot be clouds. Water can't be a pole. Each thing is something specific that has a particular identity. Number 2, the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction. This tells us that a statement cannot be true and not true at the same time and in the same sense. So a statement such as it is raining can't be both true and not true at the same time. Number 3, the law of the excluded middle. The law of the excluded middle. This tells us that something either is or it is not. There is no middle ground. So God either does exist or he does not. Jesus either did rise from the dead or he did not. There aren't any alternative options. These three laws of logic are fundamental to our understanding of our world, and we employ them each and every single day. These are also incredibly important in the discussion about statements regarding truth, and we're going to see this a little bit more clearly in just a few minutes. So those are the three fundamental laws of logic, okay? The law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle. Next, I'd like to discuss further ways in which we come to know truth. Firstly, we have deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning. What is deductive reasoning? It is the process of lining up premises in an argument, arriving at a valid conclusion. It's a formal way of argumentation or reasoning that is presented in the form of a syllogism. Typically, a syllogism includes two premises and then a conclusion that follows from those premises. So here would be an example. Okay, premise number 1: all men are mortal. Premise number 2: Ryan is a man. Conclusion: therefore Ryan is mortal. The logic is sound and the conclusion naturally follows from the first and second premise. Now, deductive reasoning does not tell you whether the premises are true or not. For example, you can have an argument that where the conclusion logically follows from the premises, but one or both of the premises could be incorrect. So here's an example. All men have hoofed feet. Number 2, Ryan is a man. Conclusion, therefore Ryan has hoofed feet. This argument is valid logically, meaning that the conclusion follows from the premises, but it's clear that something is wrong about either the first or second premise. So this is where inductive reasoning comes in. What is inductive reasoning? It is the method of drawing general conclusions based on specific observations. It's commonly equated with or linked to the scientific method. And inductive reasoning helps us understand whether the premises of an argument are true or not. And it's clear, based on observation, that all men do not have hoofed feet, so the conclusion that Ryan has hoofed feet cannot be true. Deductive and inductive reasoning are employed by philosophers, scientists, historians, and theologians alike. These are tools we all use in our pursuit of truth. Before we continue, I really appreciate you tuning in to this episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you please give it a 5-star rating on iTunes, leave us a review, or follow and subscribe on whatever listening platform you might be using to help boost the podcast's reach and visibility. If you wish to financially support the podcast, we've actually made a slight change. Please visit ryanhomespodcast.locals.com. Not only will you be supporting the podcast, but with Locals, you'll actually be joining a community of believers that have similar interests to you. And you'll receive early access to each episode each week, along with other perks that will be exclusive to our Locals community members. You can subscribe to our Locals community for just $5 per month. And if you're on YouTube, please like the video, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Thank you, and I appreciate all of your support. All right, back to our discussion where we just finished up talking about deductive and inductive reasoning. So this leads me to a very important question. How are truths about God known? How are truths about God known? Obviously, we can't conduct any type of scientific experiment in a lab to prove the existence or non-existence of God. It would actually be rather foolish to suggest something like this, because if we could do such a test, then God would be a part of nature and therefore a part of the created order. And he couldn't have created all things if he was a part of or within the creation. But God is an immaterial, unobservable being. So how can we know anything about him? the same way we come to understand truths about other things that we cannot observe directly, but we observe their effects. For example, we cannot observe gravity directly, but only its effects. We cannot observe wind directly, only the effects of the wind. We can't even observe the human mind directly, but only its effects. But what we do is, based on those effects, is draw conclusions and make rational inferences to what the causes of those effects might be. For example, you're walking the beach, okay, and you see a message written in the sand, and that message says, Billy loves Sally. Billy loves Sally. You draw a conclusion based on your observation that this message must have come from an intelligent mind. But wait, you never saw anyone write the message. You don't know for sure if the information written in the sand could actually come from an intelligent mind, do you? Well, you can come to a reasonable conclusion that this information, and not just any information, but information arranged in a specific way to convey a specific message, has only ever been observed to come from an intelligent source. And you can have confidence beyond a reasonable doubt that a message such as Billy loves Sally could only come from an intelligent mind. Because a message like Billy loves Sally has never been observed to come from anything other than an intelligent mind. In the same way, we can draw reasonable conclusions about God's existence from observations we make of the world around us and the universe at large. We'll get into these discussions further down the road later in the podcast, but here would be a quick couple of examples, okay? Example number 1, our universe coming into existence out of nothing. Example number 2, objective moral values and duties. We can make observations and draw reasonable conclusions that an intelligent, powerful mind and a morally perfect being must be behind these realities. Again, more on these to come. But I hope you see my point. We can come to know truths about God based on how he's affected our world and our universe. So we've talked about the laws of logic. We've talked about deductive and inductive reasoning. We've talked about how truths about God can be known. Now I want to close us out with a little bit of an exercise, okay? I want to share some common statements about truth, and then I want to show you how you can respond to these statements or these claims. I hope that this will be a super practical exercise for you, because I'm sure that many, if not all of you, have at least either heard some of these in your lifetime or you will eventually hear some of these. And as we go through, you're going to see that our responses to these claims are going to be pretty consistent. A lot of these are essentially just rewordings, but anyways, you'll see what I mean, so let's get into it. A little qualifier before we go further. There's a few terms that I want to define and explain before we go forward, because I'll be using them regularly throughout this exercise, and they show up in these statements regularly. So I want to clarify the difference between objective truth and subjective truth. Simply put, objective truth is something that is true for all people in all places at all times. It's true whether we believe it or not, and it's true no matter what we feel about it. Subjective truth is something that is true for the subject or individual making the claim. So truth that is up to the individual and is based off personal perspectives, feelings, or opinions. Subjective truth is essentially the opposite of objective truth. Now, next I want to clarify the difference between absolute truth and relative truth. Absolute truth is synonymous with objective truth, so truth that is true for all people in all places at all times, no matter what we believe about it or no matter how we feel about it. Relative truth is truth that is relative to the individual making the claim, so synonymous with subjective truth, and basically relative truth is the opposite of absolute truth. So I hope this will help us now as we look at a few truth claims and understand how we can respond to them. Claim number 1, there is no truth. There is no truth. So I'm going to let that land for a second and just sink in. And I hope that you're already thinking about how you would respond to a statement such as this. There is no truth. Oftentimes you'll find that asking a question is most impactful. So what question would you ask to this statement, there is no truth? Is that true? How about that one? That's a good question. Is that true? It's a great question because the statement is a truth claim. If the response is yes, then, well, it's self-defeating. And if it's no, then why believe it at all? The individual who says there is no truth is claiming to have apprehended some level of truth. Because in order to say that there is no truth or nobody has the truth, you have to know what the truth is to say that nobody has it. Are you still with me? All right. Number 2. There are no objective truths. There are no objective truths. So what would be the question you would ask? Is that an objective truth? Or is that your subjective matter of opinion? The statement, there are no objective truths, is an objective truth claim. If it's an objective truth claim, well, you see the problem. If it's a subjective truth, then it's simply up to the opinion of the individual making the claim. So then why would anybody have to believe it at all? Next, number 3, there are no absolute truths. There are no absolute truths. There are no absolute truths. This is essentially the same question. So what would your response be? Is that an absolute truth? Or here's a fun question. Are you absolutely sure about that? Again, the statement is an absolute truth claim, and therefore it defeats itself. Number 4, all truth is relative. All truth is relative. So your question, is that a relative truth? Similar issues happening with this claim. It is an absolute truth claim. Number 5, that's true for you, but not for me. That's true for you, but not for me. How should we respond to a statement such as this? Is that true for you? Or is that true for me as well? If something is actually true, such as 2 + 2 = 4, then how can it be true for one person and not true for someone else? If you haven't noticed, truth is pretty rigid. So whether we like it or not, agree with it or not, we must face its reality. So Jesus, he either did die for the sins of all people, offering forgiveness for those sins in exchange for his righteousness, or he did not. It can't be both true for one person and not true for the next. Truth doesn't work that way. We can't it can't be manipulated or conformed to the realities that we want to live out. Number 6, no one can know truth. No one can know truth. What would you ask? Isn't that a truth claim? We talked about it a few minutes ago, but in order to know that someone does not have the truth, you would have to know what the truth is. So the one making the claim would have to at least have some access to truth in order to say that someone else doesn't have that truth. Number 7, the only truths are scientific truths. The only truths are scientific truths. So how would you respond to a statement such as this? Is that a scientific truth? Is that a scientific truth? You see, this claim is philosophical in nature. All right, there is no scientific experiment or test that can be performed in order to prove its truth value. Number 8, and lastly, I want to address both and logic for a second. Both and logic. Earlier we talked about the law of the excluded middle. Something either is or it is not. And you can call this type of logic either or logic if you'd like. But what if someone says to you that they don't agree with this kind of thinking? What if they tell you that they don't affirm either or logic, but rather they affirm both and logic? Both and thinking or both and logic is essentially a relativistic way of looking at truth. So many things can be true at the same time, even if contradictory. So how can we be able to respond to this? If someone does affirm both and logic, their view is that both and logic is the correct or true way of thinking. So here's the issue. Wouldn't that mean that both and logic is correct and either or logic is incorrect? So wouldn't it be either both and logic or either or logic? Do you see the issue there? So here's a question you can ask. Is it both and logic or nothing else? Do you notice how either or still seems to overcome? Because here's the reality. If you stepped out in front of a Mack truck going full speed down the highway, it's either going to be you or the Mack truck, not both. So let's round this all out today. Is it possible to speak your own truth? Well, if your truth corresponds to reality, then yes. But if your truth doesn't, then you're going to be running into some problems. So really, it's not our truth at all. We are either speaking the truth or we are not speaking truth. If two people are making claims to truth and those claims are in conflict with one another, it only seems reasonable that we would test those claims to see which one does correspond to reality. Because they cannot both be correct. Either one of them or neither of them is correct, but they can't both be correct. So I'd like to close out with some practical thoughts that apply to us, the Christians, or the believer. All right. Obviously, truth matters. Truth is important to us. You and I carry the true message of hope for this world. We need to be in pursuit of truth. That's why something like Christian apologetics is so important. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, "In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." The term apologetics, it means to give a defense. It doesn't mean that we run around apologizing for being Christians. And 1 Peter 3:15 tells us that we are to always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within us. We are to be ready to share the true message of the gospel, the reason why we have hope with anybody who asks. And if we're commanded to share this truth, then we should know what the truth is. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5. He says this, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ." Notice the proactive nature of Paul's words. We are to engage arguments against the knowledge of God, against what we believe to be the truth. And we are to dismantle them, destroy them, take them apart. We are to care about truth. We carry the rigidness of truth. And obviously we are called to carry this truth, but we are not called to keep it to ourselves. But how are we then to deliver this truth? How are we then to deliver the true message of hope for this world? Well, I think 1 Peter 3:15 spoke to this earlier. We are commanded to be ready to give an answer for the reason of the hope that is within us, and we are to do this with gentleness and respect. Ephesians 4:15 essentially echoes this message when it explains that we are to speak the truth in love. We are to speak the truth in love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says this, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I think you get the picture. Christian, we are to speak the truth in love. And as Colossians chapter 4, verse 6 tells us, we are to let our speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Now, speaking the truth in love does not mean that it's always going to be easy or feel great. Speaking the truth in love does sometimes mean that we say the difficult thing. Remember, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. So if someone is heading down a destructive path, we are to speak truth into their lives. Because if you love someone, you will speak the truth even if it's difficult. So my hope today is that what you take away from this is a desire and a care for truth. We are to care about truth. We are to pursue truth, carry the truth, and deliver that truth in a gracious, kind, and loving manner, irregardless of the difficulty or the consequences that it might bring. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have a question for me, thought, comment, maybe even a topic that you want me to discuss in a future episode, please send me an email to ryanhomespodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit ryanhomespodcast.locals.com to join our community. I appreciate any support. And if you're on the YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and ultimately please share this podcast and let's help encourage others to think about their faith and live it out. See you next week.